The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I sat in the uncomfortable wooden chair, my hands trembling slightly as I clutched the manila folder containing 3 years' worth of evidence. The family courthouse in downtown Phoenix buzzed with the usual chaos of broken families and bitter disputes. But today felt different. Today, after months of sleepless nights and countless phone calls to lawyers I couldn't afford, I was finally going to get answers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My 8-year-old daughter Emma sat beside me, swinging her legs nervously as she tried to color in her worn activity book. She didn't understand why we were here, why Mommy had been crying so much lately, or why we'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner more often than not. All she knew was that Daddy had promised to help take care of her, but somehow that help never seemed to reach us. The bailiff called out case number after case number, each one representing another family torn apart by money and manipulation. When I heard Rodriguez versus Martinez Family Trust, my heart nearly stopped. This was it. 3 years of fighting, 3 years of watching my daughter go without, 3 years of being told I was being unreasonable for expecting the court-ordered child support that kept mysteriously disappearing before it reached my account. Judge Catherine Williams entered the courtroom with the kind of presence that made everyone immediately straighten their posture. She was known throughout Maricopa County as someone who didn't tolerate nonsense, especially when it came to cases involving children. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and her dark eyes seemed to see right through any lie you might be tempted to tell. Across the aisle sat my ex-husband David, looking surprisingly relaxed for someone who was about to be held accountable for years of financial manipulation. Next to him sat his mother, Elena Martinez, the woman who had made my life a living hell since the day I'd married her precious son. Elena wore her usual designer suit, and that smug expression she'd perfected over the years, the one that said she believed she was untouchable. What Elena didn't know was that I'd spent the last 6 months working with a forensic accountant, tracing every single payment that should have come to Emma and me. What she didn't know was that I'd discovered the elaborate shell game they'd been playing with the family construction business, funneling David's income through various accounts to make it appear like he was barely scraping by while his mother lived in luxury. Judge Williams reviewed the case files with methodical precision, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, broken only by the occasional shuffle of papers and Emma's quiet humming as she tried to stay occupied. Finally, the judge looked up, her gaze moving between David and Elena before settling on me. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too many cases like this one, too many children caught in the crossfire of adult greed and selfishness. Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Williams began, I've reviewed your motion for contempt and the supporting documentation. I've also had the opportunity to examine the financial records subpoenaed from Martinez Construction and its associated entities. She paused, and I could see Elena's confident expression falter slightly. Mrs. Martinez, the judge continued, turning her attention to Elena, am I to understand that you are the primary owner and operator of Martinez Construction? Elena stood slowly, her lawyer whispering something in her ear before she responded. Yes, Your Honor, I am. And Mr. Martinez, Judge Williams said, looking at David, you work for this company in what capacity? David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I'm a project supervisor, Your Honor. A project supervisor who, according to these records, has been receiving payment through multiple LLCs, cash transactions, and what appears to be deliberate income manipulation designed to avoid child support obligations. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. I watched as Elena's face went pale, her confident mask finally slipping. David looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Judge Williams continued, What's particularly interesting to me, Mrs. Martinez, is that while your son has been crying poverty to this court, claiming he can barely afford his own rent, you've been living in a home valued at over $800,000, driving luxury vehicles, and taking regular vacations to Europe, all while his daughter has been receiving inconsistent support payments that fall far short of what was ordered by this court. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with anger. For 3 years, I'd been made to feel like I was being greedy for wanting what Emma was legally entitled to. I'd been painted as the bitter ex-wife who just wanted to make David's life difficult. But here was a judge who clearly saw through their charade. Elena's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, if I may, Mrs. Martinez's personal finances are not relevant to this child support case." Judge Williams fixed him with a stare that could have melted steel. "Counselor, when a grandmother is living lavishly while her granddaughter is going without basic necessities because court-ordered support is being systematically diverted, I find it very relevant indeed." She turned back to Elena. "Mrs. Martinez, I want you to explain to me how your son, who according to tax records filed with this court makes $35,000 annually, managed to purchase a brand new truck worth $42,000 last year." Elena opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Her lawyer was frantically shuffling through papers, clearly caught off guard by the depth of the judge's knowledge about their financial arrangements. "I'm waiting, Mrs. Martinez," Judge Williams said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. "The business purchased the vehicle," Elena finally managed. "It's a company truck." "A company truck that your son drives to and from his personal residence daily? That he uses for personal errands? And that is registered in his name?" The judge's eyebrows raised. "That sounds like taxable income to me, which means his actual earnings are significantly higher than what's been reported to this court." I could see David getting more agitated by the minute. He kept glancing at his mother, clearly expecting her to fix this situation the way she'd fixed everything else in his life. But for once, Elena Martinez looked like she was in over her head. "Furthermore," Judge Williams continued, "I have here bank records showing regular transfers from Martinez Construction to various accounts controlled by Mrs. Martinez, totaling over $200,000 in the past year alone. Money that should have been considered when calculating Mr. Martinez's child support obligations." The pieces were falling into place, and even David seemed to realize that their carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing. Elena had been essentially paying David's salary under the table while he claimed poverty to the court, allowing him to drastically reduce his child support payments while maintaining his lifestyle. "Your Honor," David's lawyer interjected, "my client was unaware of any impropriety in his payment structure." Judge Williams let out a short laugh that held no humor whatsoever. "Unaware? Mr. Martinez, are you telling this court that you didn't know you were being paid significantly more money than what was being reported for child support calculations?" David squirmed in his seat, looking everywhere except at the judge. "I trusted my mother to handle the business affairs properly." "So you're claiming ignorance of your own income?" Judge Williams asked incredulously. "You're telling me that as a grown man and father, you had no idea how much money you were actually earning?" The silence stretched on, and I realized this was the moment I'd been waiting for. Not just the moment when David would be held accountable, but the moment when someone in authority would finally acknowledge what I'd been trying to prove for years. That Elena Martinez had been manipulating the system to protect her son at my daughter's expense. And that David had been a willing participant in robbing his own child. Looking at David fumble for words brought back a flood of memories from when this nightmare first began. It was right after our divorce was finalized, when Emma was just 5 years old and still asking when Daddy was coming home. The court had ordered David to pay $800 monthly in child support, which seemed reasonable given his supposed income from the construction company. What I didn't know then was that Elena had already begun orchestrating a scheme to ensure that as little money as possible would actually reach Emma and me. The first few months, the payments came through as expected. I remember feeling relieved that despite our failed marriage, David would at least take care of his daughter financially. But then the delays started. First it was a week late, then 2 weeks, then entire months would go by with nothing. When I called David, he'd always have an excuse ready. Business was slow, a client hadn't paid, there was an unexpected equipment repair that wiped out his paycheck. Judge Williams was now pulling out a thick stack of documents, her expression growing more severe with each page she reviewed. Elena kept whispering urgently to her lawyer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the hearing progressed. I thought back to that devastating phone call I'd made to Elena about 18 months ago, when Emma needed new school clothes, and I was juggling 3 part-time jobs just to keep our tiny apartment. I'd swallowed my pride and called my former mother-in-law, hoping she might encourage David to catch up on his overdue support payments. Elena's response still echoed in my ears. "Maria, you need to understand that David is barely making ends meet. The construction business isn't what it used to be. Maybe you should consider getting a better job instead of relying on handouts." The condescension in her voice had been unmistakable, especially coming from a woman who'd just returned from a Mediterranean cruise that she'd posted about extensively on social media. What made it worse was that I could see David's lifestyle hadn't changed one bit since our divorce. He still went out every weekend, still drove that shiny truck, still lived in the same upscale apartment complex. Meanwhile, Emma and I were shopping at thrift stores and clipping coupons just to afford groceries. The breaking point came last Christmas, when Emma's class was doing a gift exchange, and I watched her carefully count the coins from her piggy bank to help buy a present for her classmate. My 5-year-old daughter was worrying about money because her father couldn't be bothered to meet his legal obligations. That night, after Emma fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, trying to figure out how I was going to pay rent and still give my daughter some semblance of a normal childhood. Judge Williams cleared her throat, bringing my attention back to the present moment. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I expect a direct answer. Have you been structuring your son's compensation through your business in a way designed to minimize his reported income for child support purposes?" Elena's face had gone completely white. Her lawyer leaned over to whisper something, but she waved him away impatiently. "Your Honor, I run a legitimate business operation. All payments are properly documented." "That's not what I asked you," Judge Williams replied sharply. "I asked if you deliberately structured payments to help your son avoid his full child support obligations." The courtroom fell silent, except for the sound of Elena's rapid breathing. I could see her mind racing, trying to find a way out of the corner she'd been backed into. This was the woman who had always prided herself on being smarter than everyone else, who had manipulated situations to her advantage for decades. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But today, facing Judge Williams, she looked like exactly what she was, someone who had been caught red-handed stealing from her own granddaughter. I remembered the day I'd finally decided to hire the forensic accountant. It had taken me months to save up the money, eating nothing but ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, working extra shifts at my night job at the medical billing company. But I knew something wasn't adding up. David's lifestyle didn't match his claimed income, and Elena's increasingly defensive attitude whenever I brought up late payments made me suspicious that there was more to the story. The accountant, Sarah Chen, had been recommended by a co-worker whose sister had gone through a similar situation. Sarah was a soft-spoken woman with steel in her eyes who specialized in cases involving hidden assets and income manipulation. When I first met with her, I'd been embarrassed about how little I understood about David's work situation. But Sarah assured me that financial abuse through deliberately complex business structures was more common than I realized. "The first thing we need to do," Sarah had explained, "is get a complete picture of the family business operations. If your ex-husband is truly making as little as he claims, then either the business is failing catastrophically, or money is being moved around in ways that aren't immediately obvious." It had taken Sarah 3 months to unravel the web Elena had woven. Shell companies, cash payments, vehicle allowances that were really salary, even rent-free housing that wasn't being counted as income. David's actual compensation was nearly triple what was being reported to the court, and Elena had been the mastermind behind every trick designed to keep that money away from Emma. Judge Williams was now addressing David directly. "Mr. Martinez, I want you to look at your daughter." She gestured toward Emma, who was still coloring quietly, oblivious to the fact that her father's financial deception was being exposed in excruciating detail. "Can you explain to me why you believed it was acceptable to deny her the support she was legally entitled to?" David finally looked in our direction, and for a moment I saw something that might have been shame cross his features. But it was quickly replaced by the defensive anger I remembered so well from our marriage. "I never denied her anything. I've been paying what I could afford." "What you could afford?" Judge Williams's voice rose slightly. "According to these records, last month alone you spent over $3,000 on entertainment and dining, while your child support payment was exactly $0. Can you explain that prioritization to me? David's lawyer was frantically making notes, clearly trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. Elena sat rigidly in her chair, her expensive jewelry glinting under the harsh courtroom lights. I couldn't help but think about all the times I'd felt guilty for asking David to stick to the court order. All the times Elena had made me feel like I was being unreasonable for expecting him to support his own child. The evidence Sarah had gathered painted a picture of systematic financial abuse that went far beyond simple late payments. Elena had created a network of businesses and accounts specifically designed to hide David's true income. She'd paid for his truck, his apartment, his vacations, and his lifestyle, all while ensuring that none of that support showed up as reportable income that would increase his child support obligations. What made it even more infuriating was that Elena had clearly enjoyed the power dynamic this created. She got to play the generous mother supporting her struggling son, while simultaneously ensuring that his actual child received as little as possible. It was a win-win situation for them, and a nightmare for Emma and me. Judge Williams continued reviewing the forensic accounting report, occasionally making notes or shaking her head in apparent disbelief. Mrs. Martinez, I see here that in addition to the regular salary manipulation, you also provided your son with a company credit card that he used for personal expenses totaling over $15,000 last year. Were these personal expenses reported as income? Elena's lawyer finally stood up. Your Honor, we object to this line of questioning. The specifics of business operations are not relevant to the child support calculation. Judge Williams fixed him with a stare that could have frozen water. Counselor, when a parent is deliberately hiding income to avoid supporting their child, every aspect of their financial arrangement becomes relevant to this court. Sit down. The lawyer sat down immediately, and I felt a surge of satisfaction. For the first time in 3 years, someone in authority was taking my concerns seriously. Someone was looking past Elena's manipulation and David's excuses to see what had really been happening to Emma's support money. Judge Williams set down the financial reports and removed her reading glasses, a gesture that somehow made the entire courtroom hold its breath. When she looked up, her expression was unlike anything I'd ever seen in a courtroom. It wasn't just disapproval or frustration. It was barely contained outrage. In 28 years on this bench, she began, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, I have seen many cases of parents trying to avoid their obligations to their children. I have seen creative accounting, hidden assets, and deliberate unemployment. But what I am looking at here goes beyond mere avoidance. This is systematic theft from a child. Elena's hands were shaking now, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the edge of the table. David had gone completely pale, finally seeming to understand that his mother's usual ability to fix his problems wasn't going to save him this time. Mrs. Martinez, Judge Williams continued, turning her full attention to Elena, you have orchestrated a scheme that has deprived your granddaughter of over $60,000 in support over the past 3 years. $60,000 that could have provided her with proper housing, healthcare, educational opportunities, and basic necessities. Instead, that money went toward maintaining your son's lifestyle while his child lived in poverty. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, not from sadness but from pure relief. Someone finally understood. Someone finally saw what Elena had done to us. Judge Williams wasn't finished. What makes this particularly egregious is that you, Mrs. Martinez, had the means to ensure your granddaughter was properly supported without any financial hardship to yourself or your business. Your forensic accounting shows a business with healthy profit margins and significant assets. You chose to prioritize your adult son's comfort over your granddaughter's welfare. Elena finally found her voice, though it came out as a croak. Your Honor, I was just trying to help my son get back on his feet after the divorce. Get back on his feet? Judge Williams's voice rose. Your son has been living better than most families in this county while claiming poverty to avoid supporting his child. That's not helping him get back on his feet, Mrs. Martinez. That's enabling him to be a deadbeat father while you foot the bill. David's lawyer made one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, my client is willing to work out a reasonable payment plan to address any arrears. Judge Williams turned her attention to him with withering disdain. Counselor, your client has had 3 years to work out reasonable payments. Instead, he chose to participate in this elaborate deception. The time for voluntary compliance has long passed. She opened a different folder and began reading from what appeared to be her prepared judgment. Mr. Martinez, you are hereby held in contempt of court for willful violation of the child support order. You are sentenced to 90 days in county jail, suspended on the condition that you immediately pay all arrears in full and comply with a modified support order based on your actual income. David's mouth fell open. 90 days in jail. The golden boy who had never faced a real consequence in his life was looking at serious jail time if he didn't comply. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, your child support obligation is hereby increased to $1,800 per month, retroactive to the date of the original order based on your actual income as determined by this forensic accounting. The arrears, including interest and penalties, total $78,400. I watched Elena's face go from pale to gray. $78,000. That was more money than I'd made in the past 2 years combined. Mrs. Martinez, the judge said, turning back to Elena, as the architect of this scheme, you bear equal responsibility for these violations. While I cannot hold you in contempt for your son's obligations, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential fraud charges related to the systematic hiding of income to avoid court-ordered support. Elena gasped audibly. Criminal charges. The woman who had spent years looking down on me as an unworthy mother to her precious granddaughter was facing the possibility of criminal prosecution. Judge Williams wasn't done. Additionally, I am ordering that Martinez Construction be placed under court supervision for all payments to Mr. Martinez going forward. Every dollar he receives from your business will be properly documented and reported to this court. There will be no more shell games, no more creative accounting, and no more theft from this child. The judge then did something that surprised everyone in the courtroom. She stood up and walked over to where Emma and I were sitting. Kneeling down to Emma's level, she spoke gently to my daughter. Emma, sweetheart, do you know who I am? Emma looked up from her coloring book with curious eyes. You're the judge lady. Judge Williams smiled, the first genuine warmth she'd shown since entering the courtroom. That's right, and my job is to make sure that everything is fair, especially for children. Your daddy is going to start taking much better care of you now, okay? Emma nodded solemnly, not fully understanding but sensing the importance of the moment. Judge Williams returned to her bench, her expression hardening again as she addressed the room. Let me be absolutely clear about something, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. Children are not pawns in adult games. They are not bargaining chips to be used in financial manipulation. When a court orders child support, that money belongs to the child, not to the paying parent's ego or the grandparent's sense of family loyalty. She looked directly at Elena. Mrs. Martinez, you have taught your son that his wants are more important than his daughter's needs. You have enabled him to be an irresponsible father while pretending to be a devoted grandmother. That ends today. David finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. Your Honor, I don't have $78,000. Judge Williams smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then I suggest you have a conversation with your mother about liquidating some of those assets that have been hidden from this court. You have 30 days to bring the account current, or you'll be spending the next 3 months in jail thinking about your priorities. Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is outrageous. We'll appeal this decision. Judge Williams fixed her with a stare that made Elena take a step back. Mrs. Martinez, you are welcome to appeal. However, I should warn you that an appeal will require a complete examination of all your business records and personal finances. Are you certain you want that level of scrutiny? Elena's lawyer grabbed her arm and whispered urgently in her ear. She sat back down heavily, apparently realizing that an appeal would only expose more of their financial machinations. The court will remain in session for scheduling, Judge Williams announced. Mr. Martinez, you will return here in 30 days with proof of full payment of arrears and enrollment in automatic wage garnishment for ongoing support. Mrs. Martinez, you will provide complete financial records for Martinez Construction to the court within 14 days. As the bailiff called the next case, I sat in stunned silence. 3 years of fighting, 3 years of watching Emma go without, 3 years of being made to feel like I was asking for too much. And it was finally over. Not only was Emma going to receive the support she'd always been entitled to, but David was going to face real consequences for his actions. Elena brushed past us as she left the courtroom, her designer heels clicking angrily on the marble floor. For once, she had nothing to say. No cutting remarks about my abilities as a mother or my financial situation. The woman who had made my life miserable was facing criminal charges and the prospect of paying nearly $80,000 to fix her son's failures. David lingered for a moment, looking at Emma with what might have been regret. But when he opened his mouth to speak, I stood up and shook my head. Not here, not now. If you want to talk to your daughter, you can do it when your obligations are current. Outside the courthouse, I knelt down to Emma's level and pulled her into a tight hug. "Mommy, why are you crying?" she asked, touching my cheek with her small hand. "Because sometimes grown-ups do the right thing, baby," I told her. "And that makes Mommy very happy." As we walked to our car, I thought about all the nights I'd wondered if I was fighting a losing battle, all the times I'd questioned whether it was worth the stress and expense to keep pushing for what Emma deserved. Today proved that it was worth every sleepless night, every dollar spent on legal fees, every moment of doubt. Emma would finally have the financial security she deserved, and David would finally learn that being a father means more than just showing up when it's convenient. Most importantly, Elena's reign of manipulation and control was over. The woman who had tried to erase me from my daughter's life by making it financially impossible for us to survive was now facing the consequences of her actions. Justice, it turned out, was worth waiting for. 6 months later, Emma and I moved into a real apartment with 2 bedrooms and actual space for her to play. The monthly support payments had been coming through automatically, exactly on time, every single month since Judge Williams issued her order. David had managed to avoid jail time by liquidating some investments and borrowing money from Elena to pay the arrears, though I heard through mutual friends that their relationship had become strained over the financial burden. Elena never did face criminal charges. The district attorney's office determined that while her actions were morally reprehensible, proving criminal intent would be difficult. However, the court supervision of Martinez construction remained in place, and David's income was now properly documented and reported. There would be no more creative accounting tricks or hidden compensation schemes. Emma started taking piano lessons, something she'd always wanted but we could never afford. She joined the local soccer league and actually had proper equipment instead of borrowed cleats that were 2 sizes too big. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating the cost of every grocery item or lying awake at night wondering how I'd pay rent. The most satisfying moment came when Emma brought home a school form asking about family income for the free lunch program. I was able to check the box that said we didn't qualify, because David's support payments, combined with my own income, finally put us above the poverty line. My daughter wouldn't have to feel embarrassed about needing assistance anymore. David made a few attempts to rebuild his relationship with Emma, but years of broken promises and missed visits had taken their toll. Emma was polite but distant during their supervised visits, more interested in her new activities than in reconnecting with the father who had let her down so many times. It would take time, consistency, and genuine effort on his part to repair that damage. As for Elena, she maintained her distance, probably too proud to admit that she'd been wrong about everything. She'd painted me as a bitter ex-wife trying to extort her family. But Judge Williams had shown everyone exactly who the real villain was in this story. The forensic accountant, Sarah Chen, became a friend and mentor, helping me understand my rights and teaching me to recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation. She told me that cases like mine were becoming more common as divorce rates increased and parents found increasingly sophisticated ways to avoid their responsibilities. Emma thrives now in ways I'd only dreamed about during those dark years. She's confident, happy, and secure in the knowledge that both her parents are finally contributing to her welfare, even if one required a court order to do so. She doesn't remember the nights when we had to choose between heat and food, but I'll never forget them. Sometimes justice comes slowly, but when it finally arrives, it's worth every struggle along the way. Elena learned that money and manipulation couldn't protect her from the consequences of her actions forever. David discovered that being a man meant taking responsibility for his obligations, not hiding behind his mother's schemes. And Emma learned that her mother would fight for her no matter how long it took or how hard the battle became. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.